Well, why not? You just killed your wife. But when you least expect it, we'll be there.
In the bustling city of Nanjing, China, a young girl named Mei stands out for her extraordinary mathematical talents. Mei is a prodigy, able to solve complex equations effortlessly, with a memory so sharp it's as though every number she encounters is locked away in a mental vault. Life seems relatively normal for Mei until one fateful day, while walking home with friends, she is suddenly kidnapped by a group of men and taken to a notorious Chinese mafia boss named Han. Han, involved in various criminal activities, is constantly under surveillance, and he needs someone like Mei, whose abilities could help him manage his illegal dealings without leaving a paper trail. Initially, Mei resists working for Han, but when he threatens to harm her mother, she is forced to comply. To keep her hidden from law enforcement, Han orders one of his loyal gang members, Chong, to take Mei to New York. There, Chong disguises her as his daughter, all the while using her skills to track the gang's shady business dealings. Meanwhile, far from New York, in New Jersey, a former cop and cage fighter named Luke finds himself at a crossroads. Luke is in the middle of a brutal underground fight, and although he's supposed to throw the match, he accidentally knocks out his opponent, leaving him in a coma. This incident infuriates Emil, the head of the Russian mafia, who loses a fortune on the match. Emil retaliates by having Luke's pregnant wife murdered in cold blood. Crushed by this unimaginable loss, Luke spirals into despair, abandoning his life and ending up homeless on the streets of New York, where he lives in a filthy shelter. A year passes, and Mei continues to serve the Chinese gang in New York, memorizing profits and losses from businesses forced to pay the mafia. Her ability to store this information without a trace makes her an invaluable asset. As she becomes more acquainted with the ruthless world of gang business, Luke barely scrapes by, isolated and broken. One night, he gives his shoes to a homeless man out of pity, only to wake up the next morning and find the man dead, his throat slit, and the shoes stolen. Life on the streets for Luke is a nightmare, but for Mei, things take an even darker turn. One night, she learns that her mother has passed away in China, a devastating blow that leaves her heartbroken. Soon after, Han arrives in New York for the first time since Mei's kidnapping, handing her a piece of paper with a sequence of numbers he instructs her to memorize before burning the paper. Mei quickly stores the numbers in her mind, knowing they must be critical. On a routine trip through the city with Chong, the two are suddenly ambushed by the Russian mafia, led by Emil, the very man responsible for Luke's wife's death. The Russians want Mei because of the vital numbers stored in her memory. A violent shootout follows, with the Russians overpowering Chong and his men, kidnapping Mei. Back in the city, Luke's day continues to worsen. He is assaulted by a group of corrupt cops, former colleagues who are still bitter about Luke exposing their ties to local gangsters years ago. After a brutal beating, they hand him a gun, urging him to end his own life. Despite their taunts, Luke refuses to give in and walks away, bruised but determined. Meanwhile, Mei is taken to Emil, who demands that she recite the numbers she's memorized. Mei realizes that the woman who told her about her mother's death was working with Emil all along. When Mei refuses to cooperate, the Russians kill the woman, making it clear that Mei will meet the same fate if she doesn't comply. Just as things seem dire, a corrupt cop named Captain Wolf, once a colleague of Luke's, shows up at the Russian hideout, not to enforce the law but to broker a deal with Emil on behalf of Han. In the midst of the chaos, Mei manages to escape, slipping away unnoticed as both the Russians and Chinese scramble to find her. She flees to a subway station, where she crosses paths with Luke, who is on the verge of suicide. At the last moment, Luke spots Mei being pursued by the very Russians who murdered his wife. Something inside him shifts, and he decides to intervene. He clings to the side of a moving subway car, taking out the Russians one by one. Despite his efforts to save her, Mei mistakes Luke for another villain and flees when the subway stops. Luke, now determined to protect her, overhears a police radio announcing a red alert for Mei, realizing that the corrupt cops are also in pursuit and planning to hand her over to the mafia. Luke eventually catches up with Mei and saves her from the cops, revealing his true strength in the process. though she's still skeptical, May begins to trust Luke after witnessing his willingness to fight for her. Together, they flee, with Luke outmaneuvering the Russians in a thrilling car chase through Manhattan. They eventually take refuge in a luxury hotel, where May finally reveals the numbers she's memorized. Luke quickly deduces that the numbers are combinations to safes containing something incredibly valuable, likely tied to the Chinese mafia's fortune. Meanwhile, Chong tracks May's location through her phone, leading to another bloody showdown at the hotel. Luke and May are separated in the chaos, with Chong capturing May and Luke barely escaping. Determined to save her, Luke devises a plan to confront Emil and Vasil, the Russian gangster responsible for his wife's death. Posing as a gang member, Luke claims to have the coveted numbers and arranges a meeting. As Luke delves deeper into the web of crime, it becomes clear that the city's mayor and his partner Alex are involved in the mafia's dealings, with the safes holding not only money but incriminating evidence against crime syndicates. In a final series of confrontations, Luke fights his way through both gangs, outsmarting his enemies and recovering the $30 million from the Chinese mafia's safe. He also secures a disc containing data on various crime syndicates, which the mayor had planned to sell. After a tense showdown with Alex, where May herself shoots the corrupt official in the leg, Luke and May emerge victorious. With the money, the disc, and their lives intact, Luke lets Captain Wolf and Vasil go to avoid further retaliation. In the end, Luke and May are free. They leave New York behind, heading to Seattle to start anew, carrying with them the knowledge and leverage to protect themselves from anyone who dares to come after them again.